perhaps just a little bit unfulfilled, or like many of my clients that are amazing, sensitive, kind, caring superwomen or supermen out there, that yes, it's sad, and yes, while we cannot transform what happened to, well, we can't change what's happened to you, we can certainly transform through it, and you can find your mess in the message. So I'm going to, in the short time that we have together, give you a deeper understanding of what perhaps happened in your childhood and some of the ways that you get to reparent yourself. And I'll be opening up to Q&A and also do some medical intuitive scans for those brave souls of you that are ready to really hack some of your old trauma patterns. And if you stay to the end of this, I'm also going to invite you into something to help you to resolve your own trauma patterns and guide you through a short meditation to really anchor in your new abundance codes. Because if you've been with me for a while, you already know that how you do anything is how you do everything. So I'm going to dive in. You may want to keep a notebook near you, or get a glass of water or your favorite beverage, and just get comfortable for the next 60 to 90 minutes. Because as one of my favorite mentors says, Frederick Douglass, he says that it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken women or men. So I want to first let's just take a look at what trauma can be. If you think about trauma by definition, it is an event or a series of events that occur, and where one's coping ability fails to metabolize and process the emotional impact of such events. So again, for those of you who don't know me, I'm really on a mission to give you the science-based evidence of how adverse childhood experiences and the more insidious, chronic, unpredictable, toxic stresses, what I refer to as cuts, can affect you and your ability to create lasting relationships and to feel loved and to feel fulfilled, and above all, to really trust that you have always been enough. And I want to just say as well that, childhood trauma isn't only isolated, as it is in the ACE test, which look at the big traumas. But it's not the easy pinpointed events like the kidnapping or the car crash or a scary surgery or being physically hurt by one of your parents. And I say only because I don't intend to diminish any of these events in the slightest. I really want to highlight the singularity and the traumatic obviousness of such events, but also to bring it to your awareness, to get excited about this, because if you've carved out time to be here, you're already taken the first step in your journey. To know that it can also involve the more complex, more protracted, less easily pinpointed traumas that come, as I said many, many times in my other trainings. It's that persistent, prolonged events that include physical, emotional, or mental abandonment, or neglect, or abuse, and most often by a caregiver or somebody that was in a position of authority over you as a child. So, some of the examples of this can be that your parenting was consistently making you feel unsafe. We all have one thing in common. We want connection. We want a sense of belonging. We want a sense of safety. And if you had some of the unfortunate big traumas like chronic poverty, if you felt constantly unsafe because one or both of your parents were emotionally not present because of alcoholism or work stress or whatever, if it was perpetual, and I'm talking about chronic, right? So it's constant. Before you're 18, your brain does a lot of neural pruning. So yes, we're already handicapped by the time we reach adulthood, but the good news is that our brain is plastic, and we can rewire our brains. So I'm curious to know how many of you have actually taken the ACE test and how high your score was. And if you want, you can put that in the chat. But if you haven't taken the ACE test, you can certainly do that at the end of this webinar. And when you do, you're going to not only get your score, but you're also going to get my book on 7 ways to de-stress, to really begin your healing. And then get another test, right? Because our brain loves quizzes and our brains love to be engaged in learning. And the upside of this is that when you know just how much you've endured and survived, you're going to see how resilient you actually are. So you're going to get my book on resilience and also a short questionnaire to see just how resilient you are as well. So to get back into the topic of today's conversation, which is disrupted childhood, or if you had to parent your parents and didn't have a childhood, yes, I am so sorry. You know, it's a tragedy, and a lot of us here are wounded children working through our attachment style wounds. But I really, really, truly believe this, and I don't use the word tragedy lightly. It is every child, and we've all been children at some point. It's our right to have a childhood and feel safe and feel like we matter and feel like our needs are being met and that we're also acknowledged for our part that we're playing. And when that's stolen from us, it breaks my heart. You know, it's a terrible and very sad thing. But I want to make it very clear that when I'm talking about a child being robbed of their childhood, I'm not talking about, not being able to go to Disneyland for your summer holiday with your friends, or not getting the latest iPhone. And for many of us, that wasn't even a thing back when we were children. But yes, it can feel painful to be left out as a child, absolutely. And I'm not just talking about your parents making you do chores or pitch out around the house when you would have preferred to spend time with your friends or in the swimming pool or going to the movies. But actually there is some really good research out there about how being made to do chores as a child can make you actually a more happy and successful adult. I think the growing brain, we need safety and predictability in things like that. And I know for sure that if I hadn't had the discipline that I learned from being a swimmer and going to the World Games and achieving in the swimming arena, I probably would have quit a lot of my entrepreneurial endeavors before I even got started. So yes, it can be frustrating and hard to not have all your wants met as a child, for sure. But what I mean about a child being robbed of a childhood or having their childhood disrupted, what happens when a child grows up in a house that's devoid of love or safety or consistency, that predictability and that logistical and emotional security that's necessary for our overall well-being and really our proper cognitive, physical and psychological development? That's what I'm talking about today. And what can we contribute to that? Well, unfortunately, a wide and varied variety of factors can contribute to that. Being raised in a home with a parent or both parents who were, as I said, addicted to substances, alcoholics, had personality disorders, mood disorders, or any kind of behavior that's destructive where the child felt a lack of predictability and safety with their parents, like growing up in an alcoholic home with a father that was an angry drunk. It was always treading on eggshells. It was always making sure that there was an exit strategy or a place where I could go to avoid being the center of his criticism or his verbal abuse was my primary driver, was to create safety where there was none. So maybe you can relate to that. Also, growing up in an environment where there was food or income or environmental stability. I know some of my clients tell me they moved house 17 or 18 times before they turned 12. not knowing if there was going to be food on the table or a mother to cook for them because she was, drowning in her own depression. All of that creates our early beliefs about how safe the world is. And then, of course, there are the big ones, like being sexually abused by one of your primary caregivers who were supposed to keep you safe. And how confusing that can be to not know, whether you're going to be safe and loved today or whether you're going to abuse today. Other ACEs include, witnessing violence, whether that was at home or school, or seeing the death or the incarceration of a loved one, journeying through the isolation or ongoing trauma of perhaps things like school shootings or repeated in-person bullying, or today what cyberbullying is creating an epidemic of loneliness and also teenage suicides, and it is a real thing. And also living or having to go to school in a dangerous and potentially life-threatening environment and not receiving proper support on how to actually make sense or metabolize any of that kind of trauma is a big one. I know living in South Africa, it's a real thing. Constant carjackings, hijackings, home invasions, shootings at schools, shooting at shopping centers is a very real thing. And it's become normalized to a point where we might not be expressing that we're not feeling safe, but our children are picking up on that. And so we get very numbed out and desensitized. And then when we do need rational fear to kick in and really get us out of danger, that doesn't come online as it should. As I said in one of my last Facebook Lives, living in a home where the child had to be the parentified child, where they had to inappropriately be responsible for managing the moods and the chaos that the adults around them had created, or having to prepare meals or clean up your father's vomit, or have to do those kind of things that no child should ever have to do is traumatic. And being raised, right, but another one of those cuts is where perhaps you as a child was the recipient, right? You are on the receiving end of ongoing emotional or verbal abuse. And these are just a few examples. There's sadly many, many more. But effectively, childhood disrupted is when a child was robbed of their childhood. Whenever sort of the confluence of factors, whether inside or outside of the home, creates a feeling of great instability and anxiety because it's insecure. There's no safety there. And when they don't get the time or the space or the support to move through key developmental tasks and milestones that all children and adolescents are tasked with, it's how we grow and evolve when there's safety. And I'm going to talk much more in depth to attachment styles in my upcoming free training video series. So keep a lookout for that, because I'm going to pull this right back and really simplify it for you. The ACEs, the attachment styles, and then the pragmatic ways that you can start to get on that road of recovery. But again, just for today, and I'm going to go quite fast, so don't worry, this will be recorded and you'll get the replay. And of course, you have open email support and support within my Facebook group to ask me any questions about this. And of course, if you feel the call to reach out and get me to support you on a one-on-one basis. So let's just for today look at, what are some of these developmental tasks and milestones, which is psychological theory, again, contributed by a lot of incredible minds over the years. But the framework that I really like was developed by a very interesting guy. His name's Robert Havinghurst, and I love that because it's like I'm having it all. But he was a physician, and he turned into one of these sort of experimental researchers, professors, educators, who sort of posited that that human life falls into these 6 major developmental stages, and that each of these stages has a critical biopsychosocial, it's a mouthful, but in other words, it's biography, it's biology, it's sociology, and he sort of broke it down into sort of developmental tasks. And you'll probably know some of these. I'm going to run through them quickly, and I'll give you a PDF that has them so you can go through them again. But they're milestones, right? That when we meet them successfully and we're complete, then we can move on to the next one and the next one. And this is how we progress and grow into good adult human beings. So birth till sort of 6-year-old is like the first stage. And of course, I equate this as well into the Chinese clock and traditional Chinese medicine, which is my area of expertise as well. So it's things like, learning to crawl, learning to walk, learning to take solid foods, learning to talk, learning to use the potty, get out of nappies, and also learning our sexual differences and also sexual modesty. So that sort of does fall into what's appropriate as far as cultural standards, and also where I have a little conflict, because in my Out of the Blues program, I talk about how to follow your body's natural impulse. I think a lot of damage is done when we sort of go to school and we're told you have to hold it until break time to go to the toilet, and at the same time, people or parents like me are telling our kids to stay hydrated because the brain needs hydration in order to retain knowledge. So it's sort of this catch-22 situation where it's not, you can't go to the toilet, so you don't drink, and that's not good for anything, let alone our bladder. And also things like burping, or farting in public, that we're told we're not allowed to do that. So instead we give ourselves belly aches, and we start to feel a lot of shame when one fart slips out and we burp in public. So that's a subject for another day, but that sort of first stage is really about forming concepts and learning language to develop, to really develop connection, to be understood, to be heard, but also in how we make meaning of our environment, which shapes us, right? Our reality is shaped through relationships, and it's where most of the hurt appears, but it's also where the healing appears. The healing happens. Then we kind of move into that sort of 6 to 13-year-old stage, where now we're really, really in the middle of our childhood, and we're starting to really build our physical acumen, right? Our learning ability that's necessary for the ordinary games, right? The games of life. And how we have an identity, right? Because we've now created some distance from our parents in that first phase, and now we're sort of growing toward our own identity, our own individuation, who we are in the I am presence, and of course we're having to learn how to negotiate and get along with our playmates. So the rules of engagement, of how we negotiate, how we manipulate to get what we want and to feel like we belong. And of course, again, we're deepening into our masculine and our feminine social roles and the concepts that are really necessary for everyday living. So, we're developing a sense of conscience and morality and a scale of value. So, when there's a lot of shaming that's gone on in adulthood, we start to believe that we are something to be ashamed of. And of course, if there's been secrets in our family construct, like alcoholism, or somebody that is incarcerated, or there's some kind of shame in the family, we start to isolate because we feel like we have to keep the secrets, which no child should have to do. Because then there's this sort of sense of disengagement and isolation that we have to try and figure it all out ourselves. And oftentimes we don't have the safety within our families to do that. So many people sweep things under the carpet or pretend things never happened. And that can be very confusing, especially if you're sensitive. Then we sort of move into teenage years, right? That 13 to 18-year-old framework, where now we're really achieving new and much more mature relationships with both sexes, and where we have a sense of how we fit, how we're contributing. And again, this gets really skewed if we don't have that in our first 7 years. And we start thinking about dating and, leaving the nest, and what do we want to be when we grow up. And so there's a lot of emotional independence from parents and other adults, right? This is that natural stage of sexual experimentation and going against the will of our parents, and that often gets us into trouble. But we're really starting to acquire a whole new set of values and a very ethical system as a guide, to behavior, to our values, to our truths, and also in developing an ideology. So, we're really starting to achieve social responsibility, and we're also have a driving desire, to make our lives make meaning. What are we accomplishing? And it's an important part before we sort of move into that 19 to 30-year-old stage, which is, really achieving a masculine or feminine social role, selecting a mate, learning to live with a marriage partner or a soul partner. And we start thinking about, starting a family. Do we want a family? Especially if we didn't have a good childhood. A lot of my clients are very afraid of having children because they don't want to pass on that familial trauma. And we're starting to question, if I do have children, how do I want to grow them? What mistakes did I learn from in my childhood that I don't want to pass on to my kids? And we're learning to manage a home and, getting started in some kind of business or occupation. And also now we're starting to expand into the things that matter and mean to us. So we're taking on civic responsibility, and we're finding congenial social groups. Then we move into the 30 to 60-year-olds, which is that sort of middle age developmental tasks that he speaks of, where we are achieving some sense of acknowledgement within our cultural and societal circles. We're establishing and maintaining an economic standard of living. We're assisting teenage children, if you had those, to become responsible and happy. We're developing more sort of leisure time, and we're more into not the accumulation of stuff, but now we're into wanting experiences that fill us up. And a lot of time we're learning to relate to ourselves or to our loved ones or to other people in our business relationships. And we're adjusting, right? We're adjusting all the time. We're pivoting to our body changing, and we're adjusting to our parents maybe getting older and needing us to be more involved in their care. And then he moves into the sixth stage, which is that sort of later maturity. This is your 60-year-olds and over, where now we're adjusting to, less libido, less physical strength and health. We're starting to think about retirement. We're starting to think about our income reducing. Maybe we're adjusting to the death of a spouse. And we're really establishing here, according to him, an explicit affiliation with our age group. We're meeting our social and civil obligations, and we're establishing a sort of satisfactory, physical living arrangement. And, if you can sort of relate to growing up with any of those kind of scenarios, or seeing that happen in your families, that also plays into how we might have been robbed of a childhood. So just take a breath, because this is good news. And I'm going to show you how you can start to begin your journey coming back to your heart and reparenting yourself. And as a side note as well, and this one I wanted to bring up because a lot of my clients are highly sensitive people. They're empaths. And what also plays into or factors into this is that 15% of the population has what's called a sensitivity gene. So it's a variation of a behavioral gene which regulates a neurotransmitter which pushes out serotonin. So this is our ability to rebound from emotional trauma and stress. We need serotonin. And there are 3 variants of this gene. People with a very short variant, they're very highly sensitive to whatever they meet up with in a day-to-day life. But when something stressful happens, they're less able to recover quickly, and they're also much more deeply affected by positive influences. So if you were lucky enough to have that, right, good nurturance, a mentor, somebody that acknowledged you, you had an ability to soak that in, and less possibility to become depressed later on in life. Then you have the short-long expression of that serotonin gene, and that doesn't seem to affect people either way. However, there's a long expression of that gene, and those, if you're one of those people, then you have greater ability to bounce back from adversity and get back on track after stressful events. So when bad things happen, you don't worry, you don't feel it too much. So, you know, a lot of times this is where you can see 2 people that have exactly the same experience, and one is much more resilient, one kind of gets over it and gets on with life and is able to sort of digest it and make sense of it, and the other one just keeps stuck in the rumination of that bad experience, and they just can't seem to move on. But what's really interesting is that in the sort of sensitivity hypothesis gene is that it plays a far more profound role in the more vulnerable years of childhood when that brain is still developing. So from in utero up to 18, when there's a lot of that neural pruning going on, that's when it affects you more than it affecting you as an adult. So people with that sensitivity gene variant who expressed adversity growing up, they face the greatest challenges and the greatest likelihood of suffering from depression and anxiety in adulthood. So that HPA axis, and that's pumping out all those stress hormones, it's really going full on. So if you're a sensitive kid and you didn't have encouragement under stress, you're going to be more cautious, you're going to doubt yourself more about making mistakes, and oftentimes this is what I see in adult ADHD, right? It's the learning difficulties that we experience, and because there's this high anxiety, right? Your stress hormones are on all the time. But on the outside of being sensitive as a child, you see more, right? You perceive more, you know more, and you feel more. So that same gene that's making you highly reactive to stress as a child also makes you much more intuitive and receptive to what's going on in your environment. So you're much more easily shaped by what is good and healthy. So if you were acknowledged and encouraged as a child, you don't, your tendency to get depressed as an adult is less, because you learn to downregulate that stress reactivity. So the sensitivity gene can make you much more adept at having a strong inner vision where you are optimistic, right? That you can see that life can be different, and even though you've had fallout of childhood adversity, you see it as a gift, and you use that for remarkable self-growth. And then you obviously go out into the world and you end up in fields of health and care where you help others to do the same. So I know I'm covering a lot here, and I just want to check the comments to see if anybody, okay, good. So just give me a thumbs up if you're following me so far. We're already 30 minutes in, and I know I'm going really, really fast. But as I said, you'll have this replay, and maybe you want to go back and listen to this a few times over. As I said, I'm just barely skimming the surface of this today, to just give you hope and to get you back into that state of optimistic excitement rather than dread, and feeling like this is your lot in life. So I want to give you another scenario. So let me know if this is familiar to you. You grew up with a narcissist or maybe a borderline sociopath who was like Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. My dad was definitely that. So raging one moment and all confusingly kind and sweet, like nothing ever happened the next. Or maybe your caregiver was an active alcoholic and was physically abusive. How much emotional energy do you think you have available to you when you're living in an environment like this, where all your energy, you're devoting it to building wholesome attitudes towards yourself as this growing living being, or developing a conscience or morality and a scale of values? Yes, exactly. So you're right, not much, if we're really honest and realistic here. So your life energy would likely most have gone all in just to try and cope, to survive with the unpredictability and the lack of safety in your home. And you would have what we call more of a disorganized style of attachment, right? So it's on and off, on again, off again, come close, go away, because we can't trust ourselves to be safe with whatever's coming at us. So even if you grew up where that environment that you lived in was not as chaotic or threatening, what do you think the odds of a child, or later on a teenager, can achieve with more mature relations with those same sex, male and females? If you were the recipient of endless criticism and messaging that you weren't good enough, that's all, the too fat, too ugly, too loud, too sensitive, too much. I mean, optimally, your chances are not good, are they? That you'd have a sound sense of self to appropriately form relationships, right? Healthy bonds. If your self-esteem was constantly eroded by your mother or your father or both, you wouldn't even be able to identify what was healthy or appropriate. So the bottom line is that if you experienced what I call complex, right? This complex, the cuts, the chronic unpredictable toxic stress, the complex relational trauma, the child abuse, where you were robbed of your childhood safety and security and appropriateness, you likely would have been incredibly preoccupied to a certain extent in surviving in your day-to-day reality in whatever way you could. That you couldn't have had that mental, emotional, or even physical ability to focus on achieving any of those key developmental tasks and goals that I listed earlier, would you? So can you see that this is why it's utterly fruitless, and it's also incredibly unfair if you're coming from a background like that to compare yourself to your peers and their accomplishments who didn't have traumatic backgrounds. And, because successful completion and mastery of the developmental tasks in each of those stages of life it's kind of tend and befriend. So if you're achieving the tasks, you move on to the next. But if you're never able to achieve the tasks, it's going to impact how you feel about yourself way into adulthood, isn't it? Yeah, so take a breath. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kim, for asking that question. So, as I said, I do go into this in greater depth bigger than the time that we have here today on what complex relational trauma is. But just know that it's very, it's not in the DSM. It should be. But think of it as a very closely aligned to what the DSM speaks to as PTSD. So it's interpersonal in nature, and it happens in the context of very close attachment relationships. So usually where there's an imbalance of power. So it would maybe look like if your primary relationships with either parent or your guardians or those who were in authority and had great control over you. So example, say the head of the boarding school, or the director of an orphanage, or the leader in your church, where there's accessibility to the child or the teen, and there's a level of dependency from that victim, perpetrator, or abuser. So complex relational trauma, just know that it's protracted, it's not isolated. So in other words, it happens more than once, right? And it usually happens over a time period. So it's pretty cumulative, right? It's that chronic, unpredictable, toxic daily stress. So it doesn't have an end to it. In childhood, it doesn't end. So they can be the same or different perpetrators, such as going from having your father be the abuser to having a string of abusive narcissistic relationships with men who treated you in a very familiar way. And remember, this is not your fault. This is just making the connection that you're going to always attract what you know, even if it's not safe, right? Because part of you at the age that you were when the abuse happened, all that child part wants is love, validation, acknowledgement, safety from the abuser. So it effectively, anything that undermines, demeans, or erodes your dignity, your safety, your well-being, when you're going through something like that, is complex relational trauma. So experiences with caregivers, as I said, or guardians that are chaotic, unstable, unsafe, inconsistent, unpredictable, and extremely overwhelming. I know, it's a lot for Friday night, but you're doing great. So stay with me here. So there is light at the end of this conversation. So just think of it like ongoing exposure, because you couldn't fight, you couldn't flee. So you had to stay in some semblance of making sense of all of this and keeping yourself safe when you were exposed repeatedly to domestic violence, or having neglectful or apathetic or emotionally unavailable parents. There's betrayal there, right? They betray you because they can't meet your needs. They don't advocate for you, right? Because they can't, especially if they have mental illnesses, like being parented by a narcissist, and they have their own addictions and their own coping strategies. They can't be present to even be attuned to what you need. So all those kind of examples of who and what can contribute to that developmental list that I gave you of complex relational trauma, it gets messy. But what makes those experiences traumatic, bottom line for today, just know that if you are one of those children who experience trauma and stress, it's not necessarily the trauma that becomes the problem. If you were lucky enough to have secure attachment, and remember, we only need that 20% of the time, but it needs to be solid, right? It needs to be secure. It needs to be something you can depend on. where your parents were attuned and loving and consistent, right? Consistency is a big one. And they could help you to make meaning, make sense of what was going on, and help you to get back to that rest and digest stage, to metabolize the stress and organize it and make sense of it so that you could move on, right? When that's not there, that's when it gets funky. Because if the trauma or the stressor is happening within the attachment relationship, right, between the parent and you, or the guardian and you can't rely on that adult to help you integrate and process your stress. And if the stress is happening outside of the attachment relationship, so it's the caregiving adults that's still failing to support you, the child, in managing and healing or recovering from all of that, then you're likely have developed, right, these attachment styles of coping that are very maladaptive and overcompensating in the responses to try and organize your experience, simply because as a child, you didn't have the resources of the coping skills to do much else. So it's not your fault, right? It's just the bad programming of this reality that I call the insane asylum we're all living in, and nobody knows it up until now. So just know there's no one size fits all. Just know complex relational trauma is protracted, it's not isolated, and you can heal through that. Another thing to bear in mind is that stress gets passed on right in the egg stage, right? So even before conception, if a mother is stressed, and they saw this with mothers that fell pregnant during or shortly after 9/11. We've seen this happen before in timelines. I know Gabor Mate mentioned that, when his mother in the Second World War was not coping, when there was so much stress, and she called the doctor because he just wouldn't stop crying. But the doctor said to her, Mrs. Mate, yes, all my Jewish babies are crying right now. So not only does it get passed on to the egg or the fetus epigenetically, where the mother's transmitting trauma and stress to the baby before it's even born, even before conception, it's called empathetic stress because it can be, it's like an emotional contagion. It's like a virus, right, of the mind, or what we call in shamanic terms of Watiko, right, the virus of the mind, where the child picks up the stress from the mother. So, and also, just again, going back to a childhood disrupted, even if you weren't personally being stressed and you were the witness of stress between your family members, whether it was mother or father or one of the parents and one of your siblings, you feel it as if it's happening to yourself, right? That's the empathetic stress. It triggers a physical and a chemical stress response. It's what Lynn McTaggart talks about as the morphic field, where the stress as an empath, as a highly sensitive being, just by witnessing it or feeling it, you feel the stress and your cortisol levels rise along with the person that you're witnessing being stressed. So that's that sort of contagion of emotions. And there's been a lot of studies about this. Many. There's one with mice and the smell of cherry blossoms, that generations later, the babies of the mice that 2 or 3 generations before were stressed and maybe association to cherry blossoms, the smell of cherry blossoms at the time when they were being stressed, that gene, right, that gene was passed on epigenetically to future generations, and the same thing happens with us. So we're sensitively attuned to feel stresses of the world. It's part of what's kept us, going as a species for a long time. But when it becomes out of balance like this, especially as babies, where there were studies done with mothers and babies on how, what happened, how they managed stress when the mother and the baby were separated. The mother was stressed out, so there were very strong negative emotions where she felt like she was making mistakes, or she was, all her stuff was coming up. And then when they put the baby back with the mother, this is where it goes beyond words and visible experiences. They found that just, the baby could feel the tension in the body, the pitch of the voice, the heart rate variability, or all those were stress contagions, and they were passed immediately onto the child, and the children started crying. So even conflict, and this is one that we probably can all relate to, conflict between parents. I've done this, not my best choice with my own daughter, waiting for children to go to sleep and then having full-on argument. The child still picks that up, right? The brain, when they've measured the brain waves of the sleeping child in the other room, the child experiences the physiological response of stresses at exactly the same time. Hi, Tony. Nice to see you here. I'm sorry if you got the time zone wrong, but this will be on the replay. I'm pretty much halfway through, but please stay with me, and hopefully you can pick up where we are right now. But I'm just talking about how the stress contagion affects us and our biology as children long before we even conception. But again, as I said, the good news is that before we sort of continue into this discussion, your biology, it doesn't have to become your destiny, right? We don't have to keep scaring ourselves sick, because we can reboot our brains and rewire our nervous system, because the body's never static, right? The cells are constantly in communication. The neurons are still firing and wiring together, and we can lay down new neural pathways, right? Because we're always in the process of becoming and changing, and we can become more neurobiologically resilient, right? We can turn bad epigenetics into good ones, and we can rescue ourselves. We can return to our heart, and we can learn to grow ourselves up. So some of the impacts, I think I've given you a good idea about some of the impacts of what happens when you haven't been able to be a child. And I love what Judith Lewis Herman says, and I want to just quote this for you now. She says that basically many abused children cling to the hope that growing up will bring escape and freedom, but the personality formed in the environment of coercive control is not well adapted to adult life. The survivor is left with fundamental problems in basic trust, autonomy, and initiative. She approaches the task of early childhood, establishing independence and intimacy, burdened by major impairments in self-care, in cognition, and in memory, in identity, and in the capacity to form stable relationships. She is still a prisoner of her childhood, attempting to create a new life. She re-encounters the trauma. And I find that really powerful. And also very helpful, right? Because we know that we can transform through trauma. But the excuse me, but the impacts on us as adults who didn't get to be a child, they can be as wide and varied as the factors that contributed to the trauma in the first place. And I think that the work of trauma recovery really sums it up, that someone raised in an unsupportive environment, they're going to have challenges. We all have, right? With primary tasks of adulthood, like independence and intimacy and trust, and not just with ourselves, but with others. And this may look, that's my dog coming into the room, this may look like a struggle to form and keep, right, appropriate, healthy, and connected, right relationship, loving relationships. Or not even having realistic expectations of what a romantic relationship can look like. So, you know, maybe for you that looks like being terrified of conflict. And for many of my clients who were the parentified child, they took on the role of rescuer, of caretaker. So they have poor boundaries. They don't know how to stand up for themselves because it feels terrifying. And maybe for you, that looks like an inability to have introspection, to have any kind of form of self agency, or to find safe embodiment, to even start to look at what you want. Who do you want to have in your life? What kind of career you want? And it might also look like having to live with coping strategies depending on your attachment wounds. Some people, that's an eating disorder to help them cope with and numb out sort of intolerable feelings of fear and panic that they've lived with since childhood. And sometimes it looks like literally being frozen in a state, and this is your avoidant ambivalent attachment styles, where you just feel nothing. You know, you're indifferent. You don't know whether or not you even want to start a family because you spent the first half of your life already growing everybody else up, being the parent, caretaking your siblings. So for everyone around you, you might have a fear of being more trapped, feeling more responsible, more overwhelmed about how to take care of others. And a lot of time when we clear these trauma patterns, in my clients that want to have children and are suffering from endometriosis and ovarian cysts and all those reproductive issues, when we clear the fear about what it means to have children, they fall pregnant. So there's always hope, you know. Maybe for you it looked like not ever being connected to your body, and you have no sense of sovereignty. You know, have some sense of being a sexual being because you were raised with shoulds and coulds and nots, and you're not allowed to be sexual and you're not allowed to feel good in your body. And you weren't encouraged to look at what you perhaps wanted. Hi, Sue. Nice to have you here. I'm sorry, the time, I think people were a little confused about the time zone, so I've had people popping in and out, but I will post a replay so you'll have the full replay to listen to this from the beginning, because there's a lot in here that I think you're going to really relate to. But stay with me because I'm going to do a beautiful meditation at the end of this. But just looking at some of the scenarios of how your childhood got disrupted, and perhaps why maybe you're indifferent or ambivalent or disorganized, and even knowing or asking for what you want is you don't even know because no one ever asked you what you needed. So for some of you, this might look like you've overachieved, or you A-type personalities, or you over perfectionists, or you overachievers. You've done everything right. You know, you're a model citizen. You've got tons of degrees and certifications. You've got a great job, and maybe you're making great money, but you still feel emotionally dead inside, right? You feel depressed at the end of the day, like you're not living into your full potential. You feel very unfulfilled. So whatever and however that might look for you, you know, what's going on is a really clear indication that you were robbed of your childhood, and that this is some of the impact that's still playing out for you, be that large or small. So I really invite you to get curious about how this might be showing up for you, and maybe use that sort of framework of having Hertz developmental tasks. As I said, I'll put that in a PDF and send it out on the email with a replay. But now we get into the good stuff, and that is, you know, what do you do now that you're an adult, now that you know that you were robbed of your childhood or parts of it, or maybe you can't even remember. You know, so many of my clients said that they can't even remember their childhood. Just remember that, and this is the basis of my work, and why so often it doesn't matter how much external help or education or certification or modalities or practitioners you go to, you still feel stuck, is because you can't repair, you can't recover from trauma. Hi, Laurie. You can't recover from trauma if you haven't attended and befriended, so created safety for yourself, right? These are the reparative connections that we need to make with ourselves and our own trust issues, where we've betrayed, abandoned, rejected, and denied certain parts of us, before we can start to create connection with other people. And have a renewed faith and trust in the universe, that the universe is there to support and guide us. So, if you are a therapist, if you are someone that works with other people in healing, this is where our job takes on a whole other beautiful place of creating a safe container, not just to witness the process, but to teach our patients how we do this. So the first thing we have to do, as I said, is we need to, first of all, not just come to terms with the reality of our past, but to acknowledge and identify and name the parts and pieces where we were abandoned and where we turned that into self-abandonment. We have to really face the truth, right? That we were, as a child, robbed of our children. And then, we get to grieve this. And I spoke about grief and permission to grieve the other day, because I think grieving, sometimes it's so abstract and enormous. We talk about losing our childhood. It can be a very lengthy and emotional and seemingly never-ending process. But if we don't allow ourselves the room, the waiting room, as I call it, to really unpack and somatically, really shake it off, and to cry and to wail and to give grief a sound and to feel sad and angry about what's lost to us, then we're always kind of holding back our growth. And I think that it's important also to mention that we can't ever turn back time. We can't get our childhood back. But I firmly believe, because I'm working with it constantly myself and with my clients, that with creativity, with the imagination, with the intention and very skillful support, even while we're still grieving our lost childhood, we can also work towards any of those developmental tasks, right, that we might have missed as a child, by weaving in practices and behaviors to reparent, to grow ourselves up, and to put some of these elements and rituals and ceremonies into our adult life that are going to help to create safety and soothe us, right? To meet the needs of our little girl and our little boy parts inside of us. Yeah, so take a breath, because this is a lot. I think many of us really, we disregard and invalidate our grief by believing that grieving is only permissible or allowed or reserved for certain things and not others. And we need to be in a way that we can hold space for our grief. I know that it's part of being human in the world, where we are constantly tasked with recreating and recrafting our identity and our meaning making for this. Hi. So if you have any questions, I know some of you have jumped on late. If you have any questions so far and you want to pop those in the comments, please do. And I'm going to address it soon, because I want to just sort of go through some of the ways quickly that that you can actually start to tend to yourself and to help yourself as you sort of go through the grieving process, and you mourn those parts of your lost childhood. Because of course there's a lot of ways that you can support your own grieving process and make it unique to you. And again, there's no one size fits all when it comes to what our grief is going to look like. We have no idea until we're in it. And this is where I think it's so important to get support in a safe space. But first of all, to just acknowledge your grief, is a big part in this, to acknowledge your lost childhood. And then you look at from a place of trusting that beautiful spidey sense, your intuition, because most of you have that empathy gene that I was talking about, that sensitivity gene that's really tuned you a lot higher on that frequency of how to hold space. But to look out, look for support groups, look for friends that you can trust to hold space with you without thinking they have to fix you. And allow grief to move through you. It's huge, I know, and it's a very individual journey. But what we grieve and how we grieve and, what can support each and every one of us in our grieving process is going to be unique. And one of the most important things I think we can do is to really, really honor and validate your feelings, your anger, all your emotions, right? Because they're all healthy when you can have a safe space to express them. So, so just look at, and ask yourself, how much can you tolerate in the part that you're playing out in your recovery? And who are the people, places, things that are aligned for you? Ask for your ancestral helping spirits. Ask for your support people, right? The people that you already have in your circle of trust, to just witness for you. So often, I think, going back to childhood, if we were never given a space to speak up and voice our concerns, this can be huge. And just asking people to just listen, right? That they don't have to say anything. They don't have to make you feel better. They can just listen. And that can be huge in starting to look at, moving yourself and working your way back to your hearts and finding some of the tangible, pragmatic ways to allow your child parts to act out, right? That's to give yourself that experience if you don't know what play looks like. I think one of the critical steps before setting out is, if you haven't already, take the ACE test. And once you get your results, go even deeper into exploring how your attachment style has kept you safe and protected. And then if you want to know how to go deeper into that, I cover all of this in great length, and there's checklists and safety and a forum for you to actually go deeper into not just the adverse childhood experiences, but to also look at people coming in. I'm sorry if you're coming in late. I know there was some confusion with the time, but there will be a replay. And stay with us, because we're going to go through a meditation and or a little healing session with you at the end of this. But you want to start looking at some of the trauma antecedents, right? And there's a questionnaire for that that's going to take you even deeper into some of this, especially if you were one of those that emailed me and said, I have an ACE score of 0. I'm so happy for you. But if you're still inquiring about this, there's other things that are running right now. So start out taking the ACE test. Find out what your resilience score is, because that's going to really encourage you and give you some optimism in just how strong you are in getting yourself to this point. And then, get into some therapy work so that you can learn what healthy relationships look like for you, and start to explore and seek out what those kind of relationships would feel like. It's a very scary place to try and navigate that on your own if you've had a lot of visible proof from your childhood that for every reason and justification not to connect with other people. But I think coming out of this sort of epidemic of loneliness and isolation is a very key part in transforming these traumatic factors that might be running your life right now, because as I said before, we are traumatized through relationship, and we are also healed through relationship. So finding a safe and nurturing physical environment where you can actually start to feel safe and start to thaw out some of your frozen parts and pieces is going to be terrifying, and also eventually turn into excitement for you. And I think writing to heal, journaling, finding a space for yourself where you can really pour out your anger, your hurt, your frustration is very powerful. Talk stories is another great way to be able to be witnessed in story. Taking a breath workshop so your body can have some of the somatic release is powerful, because again, it's activating your reticular activating system on your, that right side of your brain, your amygdala, that was wired long before you actually learned to conceptually or have words with this, is going to be very, very important as well. So so again, I'm just going to put you on mute. So yes, hi Lindsay. There will be a replay. We're just kind of wrapping this up. So I'm so sorry if you got the wrong time. But don't worry, there will be a replay and a forum for us to go deeper into this. I really wanted to just give you some hope that you can heal from this. And some of the ways that we're discussing is taking a breath workshop, learning, because a lot of children that were in shock and trauma, it's like, what have you done? Or there was great stress in the home environment. A lot of the time you're like, your sphenoid joint, it's literally, it's locked up like this. So a lot of us need to learn to get back into that parasympathetic breath state, which is a longer exhale. And to also be mindful of where we're holding our breath and we don't even know it, because it's so ingrained in you as a coping strategy, where your breath in activates our autonomic nervous system, which is always the fight, flight, freeze response, and we want to get it down into a very nice rest and digest stage. And breath is a very powerful way to do that, and also to allow your body to have a very natural somatic release of shaking or tears or twitching, and all sorts of body parts where you've been holding for so long that are the ones that are keeping the score to this, start to come online in a very gentle way. And also things like I said, journaling or drawing or painting is a beautiful way to bring in an awareness of these wounded parts in a heartfelt way that your child parts are going to delight in, because they get to express in color and flow that doesn't involve words. So it can be very helpful to unmask trauma through drawing or mindful journey work, or painting. I do a beautiful one-day workshop where we actually paint into being our wounded healer. But before we even get to see the healer in us, there's layers and layers and layers of all this that we put onto the canvas before it gets covered up with the healer that's inside of you. So painting, or finding painting classes like that can be amazing, to just bring the unconscious into the conscious and unmask some of this unresolved trauma. Mindfulness is another beautiful way. I have a process called the mindfulness change process, and for me, I think it's the most fastest way to brain hack, to trauma hack this, and repair the brain, because you get to go back along your timeline and meet your child at the age that they were when they developed the beliefs that become the attachment styles of keeping you safe, beyond childhood. So you get to rewrite your stories in a very safe way, and then integrate those fragmented child parts back into you, the secure adult. And then there's the completion process of literally bringing these fragmented parts and pieces home to you, the safe adult. So you become aware of your feelings and your lack of awareness as well about the effects of all the defensive and protective patterns, and the way that your behaviors are affecting your life and your relationships with others. It's also a beautiful way to increase empathy and self-awareness and help you to, really relieve those feelings of fearfulness. So when you become aware of your breath and your body sensations and your triggers and any sort of underlying mechanisms, you begin to self-regulate, and then you start to reduce those painful feelings. You don't just sit in the pain as long anymore. And the beauty about that is you come out of the brain fog, right? Because your brain isn't swimming in this toxic stew of stress hormones that have been your go-to place since childhood. So you sleep better, you lose the belly fat, and you just have a better overall sense of well-being. So, I think part of that is being very responsible and to your needs. And of course, we need safety. So money plays into this as well. So we need the predictability of knowing that we have a roof over our head, that we have food on our table, and that is how we're providing income and job stability for ourselves, so that our nervous systems can have a chance to relax with the basic foundations of life in place. Remember, we cannot create, we cannot heal, we can't be in that spiritual place where healing takes place. We can't be safely embodied if we're on that lower realm of Maslow's theory, which is no safety, right? Not having our essential needs met. So we need to find ways to get resourceful to give you that, so that you can do this great healing work. And I think it can look very tangibly as well about giving yourself the things that you longed for as a child and never had a chance to have or to play with. So Tai Chi and Qigong and movement, we need to move our body through movement, through yoga, through rolfing, through breath work, so that our body gets to mend and we get to bring those frozen places online again, because our body doesn't have to hold on to the trauma anymore. We get to release that. And of course, things like loving meditation and kindness to ourselves and to others is beautiful. To be able to say, I love you, and I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I'm here now and I'm not leaving you. I love you. I love you. I love you. May I be happy and content. May I be safe and protected. Giving yourself that first, may your life unfold with ease and grace. And then think about somebody that you want that for, right? And then bringing that out into the collective is a beautiful way to create ceremony and ritual, to be able to give yourself that safe container to experience what it feels like to receive loving kindness and to then give it to others. Simple things like the 20-minute hug, not 20-minute, 20-second hug, gives us a place to not only connect with our starved bodies, but also to give that to somebody else. And we notice the entrainment of our breath slowing, of our hearts slowing down. It's a beautiful place to just lengthen the hug, to allow ourselves to stay in that place of giving and receiving. And then, of course, naming those difficult emotions, acknowledging what's happening in your body, noticing where you're holding it in your body, being able to ask that part of your body what it needs from you. And then also open that into conversations with other people in a safe space to allow yourself to safely share what you're feeling in that moment, so that it doesn't become a place again where the other person feels they need to fix you. Okay, that's also a beautiful place to go. And also, I think a big part in this too, because we carry intergenerational and ancestral wounds through the epigenetic markers and also through the storytelling, right? The stories that are told around our dinner tables about how much our forefathers suffered. Being able to reframe that, to go, to have the gratitude, to have the loving kindness for yes, and because of that, I choose to tell a new story, can be incredibly cathartic, not just for you, but for your family. And I think really, and truly, in my mind, in my heart, it means giving yourself the best chance possible to have a life as an adult that is rich and fulfilled and congruent with your soul's desires and your heart's values and desires is so important. So that we can really, really, really give ourselves a place, because we can't wave a magic wand and we can't protect the world's babies and children and others from the hurt that we've experienced ourselves. But I think in absence of that magic wand, I hope that this webinar has really helped you to get curious about your own experiences and what it might have looked like to do now, to grow yourself up and to ask for support and to really identify and name and reclaim your power by allowing yourself to have a full-bodied experience of getting angry for having your childhood loved. And also, I think a big part of this is to just, to simply be with it a little bit longer, the discomfort, the emotion, and whatever arises for you in whatever way, shape, or form you start to use this as a big playing field to be your own experiment, and to just give yourself that opportunity to be that secure, compassionate companion or parent to yourself now, as you begin to face your past and grieve and mourn what wasn't and move forward, giving yourself the most beautiful and enlivened opportunity to grow yourself up as possible. Because if you are one of those children, you know the benefits and the healing that's going to happen when you can reframe and change your internal dialogue. Because even if we had traumatic experiences, and we all have, when we can know, okay, I've got this, I'm not alone, that I have a brain that's incredibly malleable and plastic, and I can start to create new neural pathways through realization learning, through resilience. I can contextualize past trauma in ways that make it even better for me at dealing with any kind of stresses or challenges that are going to come through. But you can also emerge very gracefully into the face of them. So I want to open up for questions because I'm being mindful of the time, and we've been going for almost an hour and a half already. And I also would like to give you a meditation just in closing this. But I want to just open up before I sort of take you on into an activation, to know if there's anything that you need. Oh, and also to let you know that if you registered for this, I'm going to open up a limited amount of private sessions, an opportunity to work with me, and really go deeper into this work, because as you've already discovered during this time, where I took you through some of the adverse effects of chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress and trauma, that there's a lot of benefits, right? To really look at, that we can change our epigenetics. So in this session, it's really yours to use any way you want. If you have fathers that you want to gift this to for Father's Day, what a beautiful gift to give to yourself and everybody you love, including your fathers. Even if they're past, this is an epigenetic session where you're going to look at how many epigenetic markers you may be sitting on and how many you may be predisposed to, where you're just needing one more trigger, one more event to come at you, and you're turning on, the gene that you may be predisposed to as diabetes or heart disease or IBS or Crohn's or other of those autoimmune diseases that you might be predisposed to, so that we're going to go in there and look at that and see what it is and then turn it on or off, so you don't have to marinate in these inflammatory chemicals that are setting you up for, as I said, all those autoimmune diseases and cancers and asthmas and migraines and everything else. And it's amazing, because I think that the World Health Organization said that there's about 18 million people just in America alone that are living with these symptoms, and they don't even know that it's coming from childhood. But really, which is causing this huge upswing of depression as the leading cause of disability. With it far outweighs cancer, AIDS, HIV, as I said, heart disease and respiratory disease combined. And it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, when you start to actually know that people that have faced any of these cuts are 6 times more likely to develop chronic fatigue. And I know a lot of people that come to me have. So that, if you know that you've sort of got that lowered set point, where it's sort of generalized, just not feeling yourself, you just know there needs to be more, and maybe there's anxiety and waves of emotions and mood swings and anxiety, coming up for you, that maybe you want to take me up on that offer. They're only $111 instead of $300. And if you're feeling drawn to that, let me know. I will put a link up in the comment section. But I'm going to just unmute you all. So does anybody, I hope this has been helpful. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If you have, you can just unmute yourself. Or if you'd like sort of me to kind of have a quick deep dive into what might be happening for you, now's your chance to ask me a question. And if nobody's ready, nobody's brave enough, I hope it wasn't too over your head. But I think it's a beautiful way to just sort of look at the science and the woo. That healing does take place on a very spiritual level, but we have to go through the body, because the body's the place that's holding. It's holding all the trauma. So we need to let the body release the trauma before we can actually heal on that sort of spiritual level of total completion and integration. So any comments, questions? Nobody? Would anybody like a meditation to end this? Just, yeah? All right. Good. Thank you for saying yes to that. All right. I know it's been a marathon, but let's just go into that. So just again, notice your feet on the floor. If you want to close your eyes or keep them open, just notice the breath going in and out. And just maybe lengthen the exhale. Just return it deep down to the ground. Just notice the wave of your exhale. And just allow yourself to let the breath take you into your body, into your sitting posture. And also, sometimes it can be helpful to just, during your day, just take a few moments to just enjoy the simplicity of grounding, of noticing the ground underneath your feet, to just sit and breathe. Kind of refreshing to just allow your body to just absorb the sounds in your environment, just to know you're not alone, just to give yourself that relaxing, simple moment of just noticing, just breathing. And with every exhale, just allow your body to sink deeper into Bodhisattva, into your body, into the body of earth. And just to give your body permission right now to just digest all of this information, whatever stayed with you or spoke to you or maybe sparked your own inquiry. Just thank your brain, your nervous system, your body now. Just letting whatever arises in your mind to arise. Reminding your mind that there's nothing to do here. And just allowing yourself to call in the 12th dimensional energy vibrational frequency, holding that in now, and the capacity to just be with, or turn, just to turn towards life, that you are part of life, and that life is part of you. And just listening, making space, occupying the space of your body. Just listen to intuitively whatever is occurring or experiencing within you now. And so maybe looking at your life right now, what is your capacity to be with all of you in this moment? What is your level of tolerance to really listen to your life, the age or the ages of all your child parts that are coming home to your heart, knowing that they are safe and loved and protected by you. And now to ask yourself, what place are you listening from? Nothing to do except get curious about what that place is that is listening to you right now. The voices of your child, the voices of your wise adult, the voices of every part of you. And if your body needs to move, allow it to move. You notice tension anywhere in your body. What's that part of your body, what it needs from you now? What is a deeper place of listening? What's the place behind the place, the spaces of you that listens right now? What's the space that's aware of the places that listen right now? Inside your body, inside your current experience of safely being in body. What does that feel like? What does that speak to right now? Just noticing deeply inside, nothing to do, just a safe space to listen, to witness, to feel what is calling you, what body parts are calling you, what feedback you are receiving, and then an invitation to just look again inside to your yes of where perhaps you've found yourself in your life and the experiences that you've been born into. What is the level of presence that you can find here now? Just noticing inside. What does it feel like in saying yes to the question your life, your child, hearts have that want to move through you now? What does it feel to hold space, to listen inside to that original question? Is there a deep willingness to be here now with yourself, to uncover your child parts, their voices, their purpose, their needs moment to moment? And now, if you open the space even more to just, again, once more listen to this beauty, to just follow the lineage of your family, your child, to go deeper and deeper down, almost like you're resting into everything you've achieved in your life and going back hundreds and thousands of years of lifetimes and lifetimes of your experiences, the experiences of your family, into this moment, into these words, into this breath, and then the next, to just actively appreciate the intelligence of yourself, your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your consciousness, generations of going through life and death. Just in the inhale and the exhale, the expansion, the contraction, the in and the out. And all of these life experiences that have been handed over to you. Not just the trauma, but the wisdom that's stored in your cells right now. Your energetic blueprint for abundance, for healing, for love. Asking inside now for a growth dimensional energy, vibration, frequency. To activate that core intelligence, your eros, your life, your body, your mind wanting to live itself now. And calling your life into that consciousness now. And you as the body of life, receiving it now. Trusting that life is much greater than you ever imagined possible from your wounded child parts. Feeling inside, allowing anything that arises to be there. Nothing to do, only to feel. Noticing sensations or words. And if you feel it now, bring in the silence and the stillness of your heart to say I am, and to say your name as a frequency of love. And just allowing yourself the space to sit here a little longer in this space of radical openness, radical forgiveness, radical love. And if there's anything that wants to surface now in your life, in your story, anything that wants to become conscious. Maybe just to give a moment of stillness now to listen, to really let the question to drop into this stillness, this part of your heart, and then to just listen. And notice in the stillness is this incredible resource available to you, like a transpersonal, all-being, all-knowing, all-seeing aspect of you that's always been there, and it's coming online now to support you, and to guide you toward your energetic healing blueprint. And again, asking inside from this space of safety and connection for a strong 12th dimensional energy field to activate along your chakras, your divine line, your meridian pathways, the marrow of your bones, your fascia, to let go of anything that is no longer required from this space of safety. And with every breath, inhaling love, and with every exhale, letting go, letting go, letting go. And then slowly take a few deeper breaths in, if it's safe for you, feeling your feet on the floor. Wiggle your toes and your fingers and just slowly come back into the room you were sitting in. Open your eyes. And now you can go back to that space of safety that is your sacred chamber, your heart of hearts that's open and willing and ready to receive all of you And I see you, I honor you, and I give you deep, deep gratitude for joining me here today, for being brave enough to do some of this mental deconstruction and understanding of how your mind and your body has been wired and has done a really, really good job up until now of taking care of you. So have fun calling your child parts back, allowing them that safe space to play and to explore and to invite in people that you are daring to contribute to that in the element of play. And unless there are any questions, I think that we're complete. So again, thank you for being here, giving up your precious time on a Friday night to play with me. And I will post a replay as well as the link to that special offer. And also keep your eyes open. As I said, I've got a beautiful labor of love coming your way to really give you some even more pragmatic tools, if that's even possible. There's always more coming your way. That's we're going to have fun with the attachment styles, and we're going to really start to play on a much deeper level, so we can just all fast track this and claim our power and go out there and do our work in the world. So have a beautiful rest of your day or night wherever you are. Thank you again for joining me. I apologize for the confusion in the time zones, but you know what? It is what it is. And you'll get the whole replay and those PDFs. And if there's anything else I can support you with, just drop me a line. Let me know how this was for you, how it resonated, and what didn't, so that I can cut it out in the next one I do. All right, everyone. Thanks very much. Lots of love. Bye.